Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. Have you ever looked at a beautiful landscape and wondered how to capture that magical feeling of depth, where the hills seem to melt into the sky and you can almost feel the damp, misty air between the trees? Capturing true atmosphere and the feeling of depth is one of the most rewarding parts of watercolor painting. In today's demonstration of the Misty Valley scene, I'm going to show you not only how to capture the atmosphere of the moment, but also to enhance that feeling of depth in your painting. So let's begin. The first step, as with all of these paintings, is to thoroughly wet the back of my paper. So we'll leave that sitting there and we'll mix some colours. So we've got a dull grey sky. I'll probably hint at a little bit of blue in it. And then for the foreground, we've got some lovely warm beiges. And for the hills in the distance, I'll probably make them a little bit bluer than what they are in the reference. So for the sky, I'm just going to start with some cobalt blue, but because it's a grey sky, I'm going to add some burnt sienna to it. The orange in burnt sienna is a complement of the blue. That's why you can end up with quite a nice grey colour. And that'll do. The colour is good, but it's a bit too strong, so I'll just add some water to that. And that's a better tone. And I'm going to add some warmth to this sky, so I'll get some nice clean cad orange. For the ground, because the grass is quite dry, we'll just start with some raw umber. And I'll add some raw sienna to it as well, just to warm it up a little bit. Good. And for the hills, we'll get some French ultramarine. A little bit of raw umber. And that'll do, a blue-grey, slightly cool green colour. We'll go back to our paper and wet it again. This basically helps keep the paper very flat and sticks it to the board, and will also give me a lot more time to paint, because one of the reasons your paper dries so fast isn't because the water on top evaporates, it's because the paper underneath absorbs a lot of that water, so that there's only a small amount of moisture on the top of your paper, which then starts to dry. the light in my painting is going to be coming through at this angle, so I'll keep that in mind. I'll have a slightly lighter area of sky up here. As the clouds move further away, they're going to get lighter and lighter. So all I do for that is just add more water to my brush. Paint around some of these roofs. And I'll paint the sky down to the ground level. I haven't bothered putting in all the buildings. Now I'll pick up some of this warmer colour, just drop some of that in here, maybe a little bit down there. So I've just mixed a slightly darker colour for hints at clouds. And all I've used there is some cobalt blue, burnt sienna, tiny bit of cad orange, and then a little bit of the permanent rose just to get rid of any hint of green there. This is drying a little bit too fast. It's quite warm in my studio today, so I'll just get a spray bottle. Just keep that shine on the paper. So if you have a look at it, see how it's shiny? While it has that shine there, I don't have to worry about any cauliflowers or backruns, as some people call them. Bigger clouds up above, smaller ones in the distance. I'm going to add a bit more French ultramarine to this. Small amount of cad orange. The Winsor Newton cad orange that I use is a slightly yellowish orange, hence when you mix it with blue it'll create a dull green. These hills that are further away will be a little bit lighter, so I'm just picking up some of this weak cad orange mix for that. There we go. not just straight cat orange, but you need to mix it with some of this. We'll lighten some more for this distant hill. These wet on wet passages are a great way to add atmosphere to your paintings. Now we've established our sky, we've got our distant hills. I've been giving this paint time to settle on the paper, which will help establish that edge on top of the foreground hill. It will also stain the paper so that when I paint the next section, this paint doesn't all flow down. Some of it will, but mostly it won't. The other thing that happens is the paint settles there. If I tilt this, what you see is shiny paint. A lot of that is really just the water. The paint itself has settled into the paper. So when I start painting this edge, some of that water will flow down and automatically also lighten the distant passages. Start in the distance. See how as I paint that, most of the paint stays there, but at the same time, see how it's diluting that distant paint. Also, the blue in that paint is helping to, again, cool the grass in the distance, and that's something else that happens with atmosphere. Objects in the distance will also be more bluish than the ones in the foreground. There's hints of green in some passages, so I'll just get some cobalt turquoise and add that in, but there's not a lot of green. As we come forward, the tone of the grasses will get stronger, and we'll start seeing more detail as well. So I increase the tone by adding more paint and no more water. So I've just added some more raw umber to this. And here I'm mixing some cobalt turquoise and aureolin. Windsor lemon would do well. Any lemon or cool leaning yellow will do. And around here there's some green grass. So I'll put that in. And throw some more here. just lightly hinting at one or two of these undulations on the hills. I still have to paint the shadows on this, which will define some of these shapes better at that stage. When painting our cows, make sure you don't just leave a rectangle around them. You've got to be very careful that you also include the head when you're painting around them. Now we're doing the absolute foreground. So again, I'm going to thicken this paint, add more raw umber. I'm going to throw in some more raw sienna as well. And now I'm going to paint very quickly, move the brush very quickly like this so that I leave lots of broken edges. And drag some of that grass into the pond area. And at this edge here, I don't want a sharp edge there. And I'll break up a few of these brighter areas, not all of them, because I want some of those little highlights there. And to make it more interesting, we're now going to add some splatter. Mainly French ultramarine and burnt sienna. And this acts as additional detail on the foreground. I'm just tapping my finger. You can also use a brush to do that. Only light taps, because you don't want this paint to land up in the sky. Now, I've been waiting for some of this area to lose some of its shine. It's still a little bit shiny. But what I want to do is, if you look at the reference, you'll see, this area of the pond has, grass over some of the dirt and some other darker sections. I'll put some of these extra marks in there at this stage. Pick up some of this brown that I used for splatter here. Try not to make it too dark, but Vary the colour a little bit. And you can see how we've got all this depth already created in our painting. We've got the sky, we've got the distant hills, we've got the ground, and you can see how this area comes forward because of these various techniques of softer edges in the distance, sharper edges in the foreground, duller colours in the distance, brighter colours and warmer colours in the foreground, so cooler colours in the distance. They all help to add depth and atmosphere to our painting. There's some brighter flowers in this area here, so for that I'm going to get some quite strong cad orange. Let's make some space for it, but very lightly tapping with the tip of my finger. Get some cad yellow. There's just hints at stems and grasses here, so I'm going to pick up a fairly thirsty rigger brush. By thirst I mean without a lot of paint on it. And I'm just going to hint at some of these stems to the flowers. That'll do. Let's dry this now. I only just very lightly dried this because it was already pretty dry, and I don't want to dry the paper underneath. So now we can start working on these trees, the distant trees first, and then we'll move towards the more foreground trees. Let's make some room on my palette. For the distant trees, we'll start with some French ultramarine and a little bit of raw umber. There are no really bright greens in this painting. Tiny bit of cat orange. So right now I'm just painting the most distant trees that we can see. Leaving plenty of gaps. Think of them as bird holes. That's what the birds fly through. And I use my fan brush for the trees that look more like conifers. Always run your trees to the edge of the paper. Don't just stop just before. Otherwise it'll make your painting look a bit smaller. That way it'll make your painting look a little bit bigger. Here I'm going to mix some aureolin, a little bit of cobalt turquoise, some raw umber, just to create a slightly warmer green. Barely touching the paper. I'm using just this part of the brush here and some of the paper texture to create the broken edges that hopefully will read like foliage in the distance. These are very subtle paint changes. A lot of them will be covered by the foreground trees. I don't know what's behind this tree, but I'm just breaking that edge up so that I don't end up with a straight edge later. All right, now we'll work on these trees here. Actually, before I do that, let's get a dull brown grey colour. Put in a few trunks. Just hinting at them. You don't want them too warm. I'll use the same, just hint at this fence in the distance. Don't know if it's there, but I thought I could do with one. Okay, now we've got these bigger trees here. They're a little bit brighter, so I'll start with the aureolin again. A little bit of cobalt turquoise, lots of raw umber, and a little bit of French ultramarine as well. You don't have to mix it too much, because a little bit of variety in the greens is a good thing. Not too much paint on my brush, almost parallel to the paper, and I'm moving the brush before I actually touch the paper. And then just as it touches the paper, I lift it a fraction. And it's just the surface tension that'll keep the hairs stuck to the paper. And my main interest is to create interesting tree shapes here. Mixing a slightly brighter green over here, using a little bit of cad orange in this case. When you're using any of the cadmium colours, you make sure you don't go too thick with them, otherwise they become very dull. So vary the colour. Now, there's grass on this hill, so I'm just going to pick up my fan brush and drag some of that paint down like that. So that makes that edge look a lot more interesting rather than just a sharp, straight edge. And then I'll use the fan brush to break up any edges that look a little bit too sharp. Darken this some more. These trees along here would be darker than these ones, because these ones here are blocking the light from getting through to these trees. Because you can see more of these trunks, I'm going to paint the trunks and some of the branches in first. There's no hard and fast rule as to whether you paint the trunks and branches or the foliage first, as long as you paint both while they're wet. These are further away, so I'll make sure they're a little bit lighter and cooler than this tree here. That's why I picked up some of this blue-grey watery mix. Too much water on my brush. Sometimes I just do little dabs with the brush to create this foliage effect. I don't often use cad orange when mixing my greens, but because there's orange in the foreground and from the sky, I thought in this case I would use it. And this is why I paint the trunks while the foliage is wet and vice versa. You get nice connections between the foliage and the trunks, or foliage and the branches this way. Because this area is dry, I can put a bit more detail in around the pond. The final details will go in when I paint the water. Again, you don't want a dead straight line there, just break it up a little bit. You're trying to create interest with your brush strokes. That's why we've got soft marks in between broken edges, sharp edges. Just trying to create a feast for the viewer's eyes. You can see now why I didn't bother spending too much time painting in these buildings in the distance. A number of them have been, if not totally wiped out, partly wiped out. We'll go in and put in a bit of detail in a minute, but they weren't critical to this painting. And I'm putting in this as a dead tree, just to help connect the middle distance to the foreground. And to create realistic branches, you drag your brush, pull it back a fraction, change direction, and then you end up with quite a nice looking shape. Right, now let's paint the cows. Angus cows are quite dark. I'll just get some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. And now we'll do the water. So the water is mainly reflecting the sky, so we've got some of this blue-grey colour we can use for that. Reflections of the cows, and your reflections are directly below the object you're reflecting. We might pick up some of this tree. And we'll get some of this dark colour. Actually, I'll use my fan brush for this. Little dark areas along the water's edge, typically indentations where the cows have stepped onto the mud. And you'll also get some reflection of the side of the pond. Add a bit more texture. Now I'm going to lift a little bit of a highlight from the tops of these cows. Not critical, just something nice to do. The back of the cow will be getting some light from the sky, even though the cows are probably in shadow there. And let's look at these buildings. And a mix of grey with cobalt blue and burnt sienna. Just hints of these buildings. These shapes are so far away you're not going to see a lot of detail in them. Just adding a little bit of warmth with the rust colour to the roofs. There we go. So we're just hinting at those buildings. Nothing too dramatic. Okay, so the next step, we're nearly finished here. What I need to do is dry this so that I can put in the shadows. Paper's starting to cockle, so that's telling me it's drying underneath. But there's probably enough moisture there that I can finish this painting off without needing to re-wet the back. I like to mix lots of shadow colour. For this, it'll be French ultramarine. A little bit of permanent rose. A small amount of burnt sienna. This looks very strong there, but if you test it on a piece of paper you can see how much lighter it is. I'm going to cool it down with a little bit of cobalt blue as well. Because of the effect of the atmosphere, similar objects in the distance will be lighter in tone than the ones in the foreground. So the shadow in the distance will be lighter in tone than the one in the foreground. So I've got this shadow mix here, which I think is about the right strength for the foreground. So what I'm going to do is drag the brush through the edge of my palette, then dip it in water, and that will dilute that. Put a shadow on the side of the houses. Then we'll go into this paint. Might darken this one here a little bit. I'm going to spray that lightly. It's drying a little bit too fast. And I want to give myself time to go in and make any little adjustments if I need to. Let that sit there for a moment, and I'm going to throw some birds in the sky. The birds just help direct the eye into and around the painting. Mainly French ultramarine and burnt sienna for these. It's important not to make them all the same. Smaller birds will appear further in the distance. For those, you can just have little dabs like that. Now these trees will have a slightly stronger shadow underneath them. So I'll just mark that in. Same with these ones here. Alright, I'm going to dry this and then we'll put in the last of the details. Again, I'm just hinting at the wires on this fence. I'll throw in some grasses. Some darker grasses near this lighter area will add a bit more light into this small patch here. You don't want to overdo these grasses. Vary their colour and shape a little bit. Bigger grasses closer to the foreground, and smaller ones in the distance. Just darken the shadow under the cow. And underneath some of those little highlights that are left, you can just darken them and they become rocks. Not all of them. Some of them are just highlight. Think in terms of grass with some dew on it. I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration. If you have, please give it a like, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps me out a lot. And if you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.